Hey guys, Weiss here. Welcome to another video. If you love retro gaming as much as I do, you're going to want to subscribe to the channel. Thank you very much. Ironically, I'm doing a video here on 5 more things I hate about retro gaming or hated about it. Yes, as much as I love retro gaming, there are some things that are kind of annoying about it and that haven't aged particularly well. And what gave me the idea to do another one of these is I was playing a particular game this morning, an older game that was just driving me bonkers, making me bananas, and I just wanted to throw my controller through the wall. And I'm glad this type of gaming is largely a thing of the past. So let's get to it. I will cover that specific game a little later on this list. Number 5. Remember this monstrosity, this ginormous thing, the power adapter, the AC adapter, the power supply, whatever you want to call it, for the ColecoVision is massive and bulky and annoying. And the one for the Commodore 64 is huge. The Atari 5200 had a ginormous one. And another thing that was annoying about the old systems with the AC adapters like this, they would tell you in the instructions to always unplug your game console when you were done. And I always did this because it said to do it. I didn't know, what is my house gonna burn down? Is my system gonna corrupt? You know, is it gonna, because these things would get hot when they were plugged in a long time. Is it gonna ruin the system? Whatever. It said to be sure and unplug your game console when you weren't playing. So that was kind of annoying to have to unplug and plug in every time you played your games. Okay, that's number 5, bulky and annoying AC adapters. Number 4, losing your high scores. There are so many stories of someone's kid brother or kid sister messing with their console and their memory cards, losing their high scores. Some of the games for the PS1 in particular, I remember there were a bunch of different ways to save your games. Some games auto-saved. Some games you would have to go to a separate screen to specifically save your progress in that game or to save your high score in that game. And it was easier to lose your progress or your high scores in those days than it is now. You know, things saved on the cloud or whatever, or on your SD card or whatever. Now, I'm a big fan of memory cards, but, you know, the internal batteries on old games, you know, those go out eventually. Anyway, just think in the old days, it was a little harder to make sure you saved your high scores than it is today. So, losing your high scores, it was just easier to do back then, losing track of them. Now, people don't worry as much about high scores these days with games as they used to. Now it's more about your progress or how far you're into the game or what achievements you made or whatever. Anyway, back in the day, it was easier to lose your progress. I remember, you know, my son deleted my progress on Maximo Ghost to Glory when I was almost finished with it, and there are a lot of stories like this. Number 3, bad 3D graphics. Now, games nowadays, you know, the big games from the bigger studios, the AAA titles, look amazing. But early stabs at 3D were really pretty darn ugly, even in great games. You go back and play Star Fox on the Super Nintendo, still a great game, still fun, but it is butt ugly. It's just not a great looking game, even though it is a great game. Same with Virtua Racing and Virtua Fighter. Now, these do have some charm to them, graphics-wise, some nostalgia, but man, they are just not attractive games, just ugly 3D, and something like Xena Warrior Princess, not a beautiful game. Beautiful actress, not a beautiful game. 3D graphics, when they were in their early stages, you know, the PlayStation 1 and Nintendo 64, those earlier 3D games, a lot of them just weren't that great looking. I remember playing Earthworm Jim on the Genesis and the Sega CD and the Super Nintendo thinking, wow, this is a gorgeous game. Well, then they would come out with Earthworm Jim 3D, I believe it was called, on the Nintendo 64, but freaking ugly. That's just one example. So I remember I didn't like the transition initially to 3D because the 2D games at that point on the Genesis and Super Nintendo were just looking so gorgeous. And those early shots at 3D on the PlayStation 1 and Nintendo 64, a lot of them just didn't look great. And then the Super Nintendo and Genesis, like I said, their early shots at, their few shots at, 3D just didn't look great. So bad 3D graphics are a thing I do not miss. Number 2, now this gets to what I was talking about before. The game I was playing this morning was Rayman for the PlayStation 1, for the PS1. Now this is one of those great looking 2D games for the PS1 that I think looks better than a lot of the 3D games on the console. And it's a fun game, it's a great platformer, but for one thing, it is insanely difficult, and in particular, blind jumps. Now I'm sure there are modern games with blind jumps here and there, but there's no way there are as many as there were back in the day. Of course, 2D platforming is not a huge category right now. There are sure independent games and stuff, but I would imagine most of them try to avoid having too many blind jumps. But man, back in the day, NES, Genesis, Super Nintendo, and even up to the PlayStation era, blind jumps were everywhere. Even in good games, Rayman was a quality title. But oh my gosh, it takes memorization and trial and error to get through a lot of the sections of the game, because you'll just jump blindly, hence the term blind jumps, having no idea what's under you. Sometimes there's a platform under you of some kind, sometimes there's not, and there's no way to know this unless you've played it before, watched someone else play, or memorized it, or whatever. I do not miss blind jumps. And number 1, this may be a surprising category to you if you didn't live through this era. All games were expensive. Every video game most of us had access to buy was expensive before the great video game crash. Now, and before the ColecoVision and Atari 5200 came out. Now, when the Atari 5200 and ColecoVision came out, some people got rid of their Intellivisions and their Atari 2600s and Odyssey 2s and other consoles for fairly cheaply. I got a really good deal on an Atari 2600 early in 1983 from a friend at school. He gave me his 2600 and 10 games for $10, which was insanely cheap. But for the most part, you really couldn't buy cheap games back then. Before the crash, the great video game crash of 1983. When you could buy games in stores, brand new games in stores for as low as, I've heard 25 cents, but 99 cents was the cheapest I ever saw. And I got a bunch of those. And I'll do another, I did a great video game crash video a while back. I'm going to do another one at some point and just talk about some more details of that. But anyway, during the Atari 2600 era and the Intellivision era, Odyssey 2, when those game systems were new in stores, by and large, now you may have seen, a particular game on clearance, you may have had a lucky, occurrence at a garage sale or something, but by and large, you just didn't have access to cheap games like you do now. You can go into, there's a ton of Xbox and PS2 games, and for dirt cheap, some of the more common NES and Super NES and Genesis games, even with this retro gaming craze going on right now, with the auctions and everything, common titles that are really, fun to play, a lot of those are still very cheap. You can get a lot of great games, for $3, $4, $5, $6, $8, $10 a piece, and talking real cheap. You can get, man, there are so many PS2 and PS3, even PS3 and Xbox 360 games that are just, $2 or $3 a piece for just some quality AAA titles, that were $50 and $60 when they first came out. Since the game industry was so young during the time of the 2600 and Intellivision and Odyssey 2, there wasn't those, earlier generation consoles that you could pick from to get super cheap games. Now you could find maybe some handheld games or some Pong clones for cheap at garage sales, but nothing like today. Today, when you can download an amazing independent game for like $2, like I did with Savage Halloween, an amazing platform shooter for $2 recently. Nothing like that obviously was going on back then with downloads. You can get cheap digital games, but just the physical media, just about everything. Like if you were, let's say you were a kid in 1981, and you had an Atari 2600, more than likely you're paying at least $30 or $40 or $50 for that, $45, whatever, you know, and it's somewhere in that range. Games were expensive, and it was hard to find used ones. When they would have them at garage sales, they were typically pretty expensive before people upgraded to the ColecoVision. Now, when the ColecoVision 5200 came out, people did throw their 2600s and Intellivisions to the curb because they upgraded, and those systems were considered junk or whatever. Now, you may, again, there are exceptions. You may have found some super cheap games back in the day, but by and large, when we were teenagers or kids, whatever, back in the day, if we wanted to have games in our collection, they typically cost us a lot more than $2, $3, $4, $5, which you can find everywhere today, even with the retro gaming craze. All right, guys, let me know what you hate about retro gaming. What aspect of it, what hasn't aged well. Maybe you have something else on the list. Again, I will put my link to my older 5 things I hate about retro gaming. And again, I love retro gaming, but not all of it's great. All right, guys, thanks for watching. Thank you for hitting that like button. Thank you for subscribing to the channel. I really appreciate it. You guys are awesome. If you're a fan of my work, you might want to consider supporting me on Patreon. For just a low fee each month, you get a lot of extra content. Another way to support the channel and my writing career is to buy books direct from me, including the 100 Greatest Console Video Games, the Classic Home Video Game Series. It's like an encyclopedia set. And this massive bad boy, the NES Omnibus Volume 1 A through L. I will put links in the description of this video where you can buy books direct from me and where you can support me on Patreon. Thank you guys so much. I really appreciate it.